afternoon. It is Tuesday, April 10th, 2012. I'm Barbara Tinnerman Cecil, and on behalf of Susie Spittler, I want to welcome you to the 13th, but not unlucky, oral history taping. This time we're going to talk about Nashville, and our first speaker is going to be Gail Honeyman, who has a little bit of history to give you about Nashville before our panel starts. Thank you very much. Gail.
Nashville is one of the neglected villages in Union Township. In reading through the Miami County histories that have been published through the various years, it's not mentioned. In 1824, Benjamin Honeyman arrived from West Virginia and settled along the Kessler-Frederick Road. He owned from Shear Road to the state highway, facing the highway. And he unsuccessfully laid out 8 lots to sell, named it Nashville. Nothing happened. It was about a decade later that someone else then was successful, and there were a few houses built. I thought I had the name of who had laid the second time, but I couldn't find it when I was going through my notes. John Fouts, in April of 1827, sold lot number 23, which is the corner of 571 and Kessler-Frederick Road, to the school board, and that became school district number 3. And I just noticed that the lady next has a photograph that she'll be showing of that schoolhouse a bit later. There were a number of churches involved early on. Philip Yonts came from North Carolina. He was a Dunker, and he arrived just shortly after 1820 and established a Dunker church. There weren't meeting houses. They met in homes, and he was a circuit rider. He established 3 other congregations, which are now all Church of the Brethren congregations, one in Potsdam, and then over in Darke County, the Pittsburgh and the Painter Creek churches. He died in the early 1860s, and with his death, most of the members had moved away. So the church was closed in 1869. In 1835, Lyman Wheelock sold a parcel of land to the Presbyterians. And there was a meeting house built, and it was used jointly by that group and also the Methodist. And that was located not quite a mile north of Nashville on the Kessler-Frederick Road, on the east side of the road. That congregation did not last too long. It was, apparently the Presbyterians were not very numerous in this area. The Fouts Church was organized in 1845. And that was located at Iddings Road and 571. The building still exists that was located there. That was sold in, 1878, and with the sale of that, then it was divided. The church here in West Milton, the Christian Church, and the West Union Christian Church had previously used the Fouts Meeting House on alternate Sundays. Mary Fouts Wheelock deeded the property for the West Union Church in Nashville in 1878, and that's now known as the Nashville United Church of Christ. The brick was burned for that on the north side of the state highway opposite the cemetery. The Curtis Union Church was founded in 1859, and that's now the Brush Creek Church of God. And originally that was called the Brush Creek Church of God of the Abrahamic Faith, and it was established in 1926 when they acquired the deed, although they had been meeting there a number of years prior. It being a union church, any denomination that wanted to use it was welcome to do so. The Church of God during their earlier years was named Soul Sleepers, after some of their faith beliefs. There are 4 cemeteries located within the Nashville area. Vor Cemetery is actually misnamed. That's a name that came about during the 1930s, and it originally was would have been the Brush Creek German Baptist Brethren Cemetery. There are 2 markers in that old cemetery dated 1821. Lyman Wheelock and his wife Mary Fouts established the Wheelock Cemetery in 1832 with the death of their daughter Eliza. The Honeyman Cemetery on Shear Road was the oldest marker there is 1836. And that farm is still owned by a descendant, Nelson Boer. The Curtis Cemetery was established in 1834. At least that's the oldest marker that is there presently. And that's all I have to say. I'll turn the floor to you.
I'm Juanita Bissett, and I am a racer. I'm Juanita Bissett, and I'm a racer, and have lived in Nashville all of my life. Nashville has been a very nice little community to live in. There have been many changes through my life, from gravel roads and no electricity to what we have today. Records show that the Wheelock Cemetery was started in 1932. Now, of course, a lot of things I have read, it's not what I know, so it's what I've read. A lot was donated by Mary Wheelock family near the Wheelock Cemetery. A new church was then erected and dedicated in 1879. Clay for that church was gotten from a field nearby. In this old part of this is now the old part of what is now the Nashville United Church of Christ. In the year of 1966, now I'm talking about 1966, the church had a membership of 408. The church was remodeled to the beautiful church it is today in 1956. On the corner of Frederick Road South and 571, there was a one-room brick schoolhouse which held 4th to 8th graders. One teacher was a very well-liked person, as probably the others were too, but I happen to have known this man was S.R. Rollins. In the early years, there was a horseshoe business at the corner of Nashville Road and 571 where horses were shoed and other items were made from metal. It was a natural place. Let's see. No, I needed to put this up here farther. At the schoolhouse, it was a natural place for the community to play softball in the front yard of the school every weekend. Joe Shellhass and his son Michael, along with their families, bought land between Nashville Road and Kessler Frederick Road on State Route 571. They built and opened a blue Sunoco service station in 1926 and had a small amount of groceries. They also raised vegetables. They had fish brought from Lake Erie and sold foods to the West Milton Inn. Now, this was in 1926. They farmed many acres in Nashville. Their farm ran from 571 north to what was later the Coon Club. North from the big rock on the hill in Nashville, there were Indian burial grounds. Now the big rock was there, and this would be, as we look at it from 571, and look over the rock, the burial grounds were back behind that rock.
I think legend has that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's legend, that there were burial grounds north. I don't know
Yes,
if that was,
that was a legend. I mean, I don't know that, only what I've read. It might explain why we found so many arrowheads and chipped flint on our property just across the road. At one time, my husband and I lived on Kessler Frederick Road, and in our garden, a lot of times we'd turn up some flint or pieces of or arrowhead. Once in a while, we'd find an arrowhead. Let's see. Just a minute here. I think I went faster than I thought. In 1927, Charles Racer and my father, Nevin Racer, did custom work in the area. He had a thrashing machine, a corn husker, a baler for straw and hay, and a steam engine. He would move his equipment from farm to farm to do the work. The lady of the house where they were working would prepare a big meal for all the farmers that came to help. Now that was up until 1940, so anything else I got here, maybe I'd want to add in later.
you want to pick it up there?
My name's Bill Beck, and I lived all my life in Nashville. Matter of fact, I was born there. So, got a little bit of expertise in what I'm going to say here. Not many people can say they was actually born in Nashville. I was born in Joe Shellhouse's Sunoco station there, which my brother Dick, which is in the audience there, Myra Stossler, and a few other people remodeled that place into what it is right now. The old rock that you talked about there, I remember playing on that rock when I was a kid, and I'd heard that there had been Indian artifacts on the property, and my grandmother had an old cow there that she used to milk, and her name was Mary Harshbarger, and she took care of great-grandpa and great-grandma Shellhouse there in the corner of Nashville. Well, when Nashville is Kessler Frederick Road and 571 till almost the day Grandpa died. Actually, Grandma Shellhouse actually died in the house right in front of me when I was playing on the floor. She quit rocking in the rocker and she had passed on. My very earliest recollections, you know, I traveled all over that area when I was a kid. Different atmosphere back when I was a kid. I fished up and down the creek there, Brush Creek, swam, fished all the way clear down to the Stillwater River, really, down there south of Frederick. And up far north there, and Juanita, where she lived at, her and Charlie, hunted all that, and all around there. Matter of fact, back in the day, you could go anywhere and hunt and not have to worry about anybody, causing you a problem. I grew up there with a great bunch of guys: Roy Van Dyke, Mark Hirschberger, Paul Hirschberger, my neighbor over there, Dick Honeyman, sitting in the office or in the audience there. Dick and I worked on motorcycles all the time. Roy and I, practically everybody in Nashville had a motorcycle at one time or another, including my father and uncles, and you name it. Everybody rode motorcycles, and brother Dick there as well. He's a big motorcycle rider. So big influence on what I did as a youth, really. And like I say, my friend Roy and Mark, great influence on me. And the West Milton schools, best days of my life, I'll tell you right now. Had a great time growing up when I was a kid. Times were hard for us there in Nashville, as they probably was throughout the area. Definitely a blue-collar area. Many things went on there. I remember my mother, we'd be sitting there in an evening, in the summertime, and traffic sometimes would get heavy there on 571 Kessler Frederick, and all of a sudden there'd be a horrific crash, and my mother, she would jump about 2 feet off the chair, and we'd run out there, and people were laying everywhere. Had many wrecks there on that corner, and a very dangerous place. As a matter of fact, I think I don't know how many years ago they put a flashing light on that corner finally. And but when I graduated from high school in 1964, about 4 years later, we moved to northern Michigan, and then really far up north, and then down to Florida. And just recently, within 3 years, we moved back. You can imagine what it was like for me, been gone 30-some years, and moved back. And I'll be darned, everybody got old on me. I remember everybody back in the day. They were all young and everything. And I look at people, and I think, gosh, I ought to know them, But as time goes by, the memory kind of fades. Terry Bissett over here, we called him Terry Biscuit back in the day. And I remember riding a bus with him, as a matter of fact, and Mr. Schaefer's kids there and such like that, and a whole bunch of people up through Kessler there. They called Turkey Foot back in the day. And as kids, we would jump the train there in Turkey Foot or Kessler, and we'd ride the train over to Ludlow Falls, and we'd jump off the train over there, and we'd go swimming in the falls when we was kids. And then when the train came back through, we'd jump on the train again and ride it back to Kessler. Can't get an education like that anymore, that's for sure. Had a great time. There's other things, as it comes out of the fog of years and years ago. My brother Dick and I were talking about it. Who built the Coon Club? Some things like that. The Coon Club was built by Keith Gray and my older brother, Donnie. Keith laid the block for that, and Donnie carried the mortar and such like that. The property was donated from my great-grandpa Shellhass to make that Coon Club. That was the focal point of the community there, with all the softball games that went on there. We had teams from Kessler. Horst Fogel had a team there for many, many years, did a tremendous amount of work there, and I'm proud to say that not only did my brother have a part in building that park there, but I also had a part in help building the Nashville Park up there, the church park as well. My brother Dick played ball there. He was a big-time baseball player, pitcher, and what have you. And I'll say one thing, we had some terrific teams. Let me tell you, a lot of competition. I remember distinctly a team called the 9 Old Men, and they were very good, fast pitchers, crackerjack infielders, and such like that. And then along came a brand new team. It was called the Boy Scouts. We knocked the 9 Old Men out of contention for the league and tournaments, what we did. Roy played. I think Mark and Paul played as well. Mark, Paul Hirschberger. We built kind of a dynasty there. Roy was pitcher, and I think, what did Mark play? Second base or something like that, Roy? And you as pitcher, you do remember that, right? He must.
He was a very good pitcher.
Yeah, a very good pitcher, as a matter of fact. So a lot of the focal point for Nashville was around the Coon Club, and then later on, the focal point went to the church park up there, and developed into a great place. And I played ball up there and had a very successful team called the West Mountain Merchants. They sponsored us and such like that. Bought our uniforms, baseball bats, things like that. And we won league and tournament there many years in a row before I moved away to Michigan. Those are the reflections that I remember being from that area. That's about all I have right now.
Well, Bill, you brought back some memories I had kind of forgot about, really. My name's Terry Bissett, and I'm substituting for my uncle Charles Racer, who's a little under the weather today. One thing, before I forget it, about the Coon and Game Club just north of where I lived on Kessler Frederick Road from 1949 till I went to college in 1967. The playground, there was a playground by that ball field. Well, the playground, most of it, a lot of it, went to the Nashville United Church of Christ Recreation Park in 1963, 64. I apologize, I don't know the exact year, but a lot of that went over there. I remember, I think Charles, I think you were taking it down the road. I remember the large frame swings, which you can't get swings like that anymore. They don't, you can't have the large ones. Going down in 2 pieces down the road with a forklift over down 571 and into the church. A lot of those pieces went there. Just this last summer, that playground was dismantled and recycled. It's been in existence all that time, and those pieces have finally worn out, obsolete, and had to be taken down. So I kind of had forgotten some of that, but that they did come from the Coon and Game Club, and I do remember softball games up there.
Do you remember the 2 gentlemen that lost their life in
Yeah,
the construction of those? It should be mentioned, really. Mr. Smith up north of Kessler
Yes.
was killed by an automobile slamming into the back of the wagon and driving the wagon into him sitting on the tractor. And then there was another young guy, electrician, that,
Mr. Brubaker,
yeah,
who's working on the lights at the park, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
and was electrocuted. Yeah. But that park is still in existence, and there were games when I was a kid and an adult even playing there at 5 nights a week and on weekend tournaments. Now there's one Little League team that plays there. In April, May, and June, and into July, we allow them to play there. And they in fact, just the other night I was back there. I drove back, didn't know they were going to be there. 60 to 70 cars, just like the old days. 2 teams of Little Leaguers with parents. Kids were on a new playground. It was really a throwback to the old days to see all those cars clear out the driveway, which, it's that brought back some memories right there of how it used to be. One thing I want to say, there's a plat that my grandfather and my Uncle Charles and my dad Harold Bissett started on the southeast corner of 571 and Kessler Frederick Road, started around 1965. The land, if I can remember right, it was around 40 acres or maybe more than that even, purchased from Dewey Hughes. And a plat was started, 18 houses total were built. A road, Racer Drive, was put in the late 60s. So that's an integral part of going down 571 or Kessler Frederick, seeing all those homes there today. It expanded the population, probably doubled it or tripled it, really from the old days of what the houses we had. Of course, back then we knew everybody. Like Bill said, everybody. You knew everyone in Nashville, and unfortunately, times have changed. That's not the way it is for the most case today in any community. Did you have anything else, Mom, picking up later on in the 60s or 70s?
Well, I had a little something back a little farther. Our father started a building business and built his first, I need to talk a little louder. Our father started his building business and built his first house east of Nashville for Torrance Lasher. He also built a parsonage for the church in the center of Nashville. His building business built many houses and churches in Miami County. And as he got older, his son, Charles, my brother, and my husband, Harold, took over the business. Another business that was there in the later years, about the same time my father was there, was Macy's Plumbing Shop. Was started in Nashville on the Kessler Frederick Road by Chester Macy. His son-in-law, Jim Hefner, also worked with him and later took over the business, which is now east of Nashville on State Route 571. Those were two things that I had that I thought of. I have a little, well, it shouldn't be funny, I guess, but there was a man lived in Nashville by the name of Link. And he carried a stick over his shoulder with a bag on it. And he'd go to get food. And he'd walk by our house. And I was afraid of him because I was afraid, I was little, he was going to put me in that bag and carry me away. But anyway, from his house, he would go west. And he lived up Nashville Road on a little bend. He would go west by a fence row, and he had a place where he prayed. And we could hear him praying down to our house. And many nights he would be out there praying late in the night. And from our house, and because I was little, it sounded kind of, scary. But it was because I just wasn't old enough to realize what was going on. But
Can I comment about him?
Sure.
That was John Lincoln Honeyman that you're speaking of. And when he was a young man, he went west to Montana, and he was a sheep herder, and he was attacked by some bandits and beat within a hair of his life. And with that, he suffered a great deal of brain damage. And one of his nephews went out and brought him back. And Link never married. When I first started doing genealogy, my great aunt Iris Markley commented to me that she had gone to his funeral. she said it rained so hard the day that he was buried in the Honeyman Cemetery that they had to put boulders on his coffin to hold it in the ground. And one of my cousins, Ruth Elaine Elliott, commented that they lived on a farm next, and he would go out into the fields and he would start mooing like a cow. And her dad would go out after he'd been doing this for quite some time and would say, "Now, Link," and he'd start talking to him, and he would quiet down. But he was just, his drum was wound a little bit differently than most folks, but it was a result of the injury that he had suffered many years earlier.
Now, I guess I wasn't paying close enough attention there, but did he go out there after he lived up there or
No,
before?
Before, yes.
Okay. I remember him so clearly coming down the road, and I would go back close to the house and sit there and watch him, and I kept wondering what he had in that little bag. I think he went and bought groceries somewhere, and at that time, well, there was a grocery in Nashville, a small one, but I think he brought home groceries.
So the stick and the sack was the forerunner of today's backpack, I guess you would say? That was the early backpack days.
Fanny pack.
Yeah, fanny pack. He might have got the groceries at Shell
Yeah.
House Station. Didn't they have some groceries in there?
Yeah, probably got it at great grandpa's station there, I would imagine.
And carried him back, yeah.
There
Oh.
was several steep hills in Nashville, which I imagine I lived in Nashville all my life. And when I was a kid, we just, every time it snowed, we had to grab our sleds, go back through the field, and sled on Mendenhall's Hill. And I don't know whether any of the rest of you out here in the audience did that, but sledding, yeah, got a couple
I can-
out here that.
I can tell you a little story where we used to sled ride at. We used to go down to Brewers, down on the curve there, and we sled, we didn't have sleds back in the day, but we'd get a piece of porcelain metal off an old refrigerator and bend the edge up, and we'd go down over that hill there and what have you. And Brewers had an old buck sheep in there, full curl to horn, ornery rascal, and he'd come over there, and we always took a baseball bat out there for protection, and he charges what he would do, and you'd tap him with that baseball bat, and then he'd leave you alone for a while. But we did a lot of sled riding down there hills there in back of the barn. It was a lot of fun when we was kids.
Yes, and some of the hills right there in Nashville property on the Hughes farm. We have, I think my brother owns that farm now, or that field, and we would go down there and sled on a hill. Sledding was a great thing when the snow came for the whole.
I'm going to tell a little story here. There's a gentleman by the name of Jim Hughes. That was Dewey's son there. And one time when they lived across the road from us there in Nashville, it rained and run down into the garage here. And Jim had a 56 Buick Roadmaster at the time. And it ran down in there, and he couldn't get his car out of the garage because it was on ice. And Jim, every once in a while, he'd show his temper a little bit. And I remember being in there in the garage, and he's got that Buick floorboarded. And there he's doing 100 miles an hour sitting still. Because I remember the speedometer just laid right over there one time. Jerry and I grew up together. That was Jim's boy. We hunted and trapped all that area down through there when we was kids. And Jerry lives down in Venice, Florida now. And I've been in contact with him several times, but I don't hear much from him anymore. Do you remember any of the other kids around, Terry?
Davis's,
Yeah, Tom Davis?
Brewers, Harshbargers, lived on the corner
Yeah.
there.
Schwartz's.
Up the, Swartz is up the road, Van
Swartz
Dyke's,
Burnside's.
Honeyman's.
Yeah, the Honeyman kids.
A lot of kids in that
Yeah.
40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Because it wasn't hard to get a softball game going, was it, Roy?
Did-
I mean, all you had to do is just start out.
Did you ever remember when we played football up in Ned Davis's field there?
Absolutely.
We played generally against Kessler is what we played. And proud to say that the Nashville boys whipped up on them Kessler boys, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Those are some of the memories I have about Nashville. And you know, you can't talk about Nashville and not talk about Nashville Church, United Church Christ there. There was a gentleman there by the name of Chuck Wyatt. Do you remember him, Juanita? Chuck Wyatt.
Why?
He was a scoutmaster there for Troop 243. I can even remember my troop number. Anyways, Chuck, I remember he went all through the Navy and never learned how to swim. And Chuck liked to trap turtles. And up on Painter's Creek, unfortunately, Chuck met his end up there, stepped off in a hole checking his traps, and Chuck drowned up there. But Chuck and Ned Davis was the troop leaders at that time. Best Boy Scout troop that we've ever had around here. They used to take us down to Camp Cricket Hollow down in Dayton and camp out for the entire week. We had good enough troop there. We won honor guard duties and things like that because you got to be first in chow line if you won that.
It's interesting, Bill, you say the church, because if I ever say something about Nashville to anyone, they'll say, oh, where the church is right out on 571 and a cemetery there. I mean, it's kind of a landmark, actually, in the area. There's the church there.
Well, yes, and that church was built in 1879.
Right.
You remember what happened to the church one year? Juanita, the back end fell off.
When they were building
Yeah,
the
they
new
were-
park.
They were remodeling it, and I think some of the ground, and we have rains, and some of the ground got soft around it. Anyway, a side of what they had put up.
We'd always said that one of the kids there from Nashville went to church that Sunday, and the back end of the church fell off. I won't mention his name.
After we're done, if anyone would, well, here's a picture of the gas station there.
Yep,
Look
And
at that.
right there it is.
And there's the schoolhouse.
the man that built that gas
That
station
gentleman
is
there,
Joe
that
Shell.
gentleman right there is Joe Shawhouse. Okay, with the beard there. I can remember sitting on his lap when I was a little boy, and I'd pick up pears out in the front yard there, and he'd peel pears, and Grandpa and I'd eat pears. I'd look up at him and I'd think, golly, where's his mouth at, you know?
He had that big beard.
You know, he had that big snow white beard at that time, you know? Nice, one of the nicest guys I ever knew.
Here's the picture of you say 4th through 7th grade, 4th through 6th grade?
4th through 8th.
Oh, 1936, 5th through 8th grade. It's on the back here.
And Fred Schaefer's in that picture.
Fred's. How about that? That would be on the southeast corner, right, of Kessler Frederick and 571.
Yeah. And I was very sad when West Milton Union centralized, because I went to a schoolhouse in Kessler. It burned down one day when I was home, and I went to Ludlow to finish the year. Then I was so happy the next year I was going to get to walk to school to Nashville, and I'd always thought about that as I was growing up. I was going to get to walk to school. Didn't Milton Union centralize, and they brought all the schools from out in the lying territories, Nashville, Kessler, Ludlow Falls, Laura, Potsdam, all of them went to West Milton.
And you got to
So
ride the school bus, didn't you?
And I had to ride the school bus, but I didn't get to go to Nashville. And after living there, growing up there, I look forward to that every day. When I got to Milton, I cried, and they said it was because I was so disappointed that I didn't get to go to Nashville. The teacher there, S.R. Rollins, I think he was some man. I think everybody liked him. I didn't have him, but I knew him from living in there, in Nashville. So the service station, that was a,
I thought the interesting thing I had not heard before was, of course, I don't remember just I don't know when the service station part went out. I don't really remember that.
I can remember
part
the
of-
pillars and everything.
Yeah, the
that are
pillars
on
I
it.
do.
Yeah.
I thought that was real interesting about the gentleman that was fishing in Lake Erie. Now, if you can imagine back then, coming through, that's a 3-hour drive today, through Nashville with perch to sell there, and then they took those over from there to the West Mountain Inn. That's pretty interesting to me back in that day. That is a long trek to get fish to the West Mountain Inn, but kind of interesting.
well, it might have been that same man came through with fish and stopped at our house, and which we were only like, not too far from the filling station in Nashville. And he would stop and Mom would buy fish from him. And then we had a grocery truck that came through Nashville. And it was like a big school bus, excuse me. You would get in from the back and walk through the school bus or the grocery truck and buy groceries. It was sitting all along the aisles.
Was
And
that
when
an
you got-
Omar? Was that an Omar bread truck
No.
and groceries?
This was a big grocery truck. And you would get to the front of the truck and pay the man and then go out. And he'd come through, it still seems to me like it was on Wednesdays every week, about the same time. Do you remember him, Charles, the grocery truck?
Well, you're a lot older than him.
Well, I know, I'm 6 years older than my brother.
I remember a bread truck, of course, the milk truck, something called Jewel Man or Jewel Tea
Uh-huh, Jewel Tea Man. Yeah,
coming by, but not a grocery truck.
oh yes, grocery
Yeah,
truck.
wow.
On the
Well-
Rangeline Road, there was a grocery truck too.
And of course, every community had one or two little groceries or markets.
I think they came from Inglewood.
Really.
There was a grocery truck that came on the Rangeline Road, and I think they came from Inglewood. That's a long time ago.
Long time ago, yes. I know,
Do you have anything to say? Do you have anything to say? You have anything to say?
My name's Dick Beck. I'm an older brother of baby Bill sitting up there. And talking about bread trucks, I remember the Old Home Bakery, Omar, Sunbeam. I don't recall the grocery truck. That's for my time.
the grocery truck was like a school bus.
I don't
And
recall
they had-
that.
They had groceries on both sides, and, yeah, they come once a week.
I don't remember that, but was it or was it not Telus Hall that sold the fish? Seemed like he had a box on the front of his
I think that's
Model
who it
T.
I think that's who it was.
Okay. I recall him. He went all over the township selling fish, and where he got them, who knows?
I just wondered if anybody remembered Tellis Hall. He used to go through the country peddling fish. He'd have a wood crate wired to an old Model T Ford, and he'd go house to house peddling fish. That was probably, late 40s, I'm guessing. Just happened to think of that when he's talking about fish. My name's Jerry Long.
Anybody else in the audience? Richard, you have anything to add? Anybody else?
In 1919, John Kessler wrote an autobiography of his life. And he lived a mile north of Nashville. And he walked to the school, and he started school in 1842. And his comment was that his walk was the greater part through the woods, which, and today, seeing that area, one would not realize that it was that heavily forested. In the Nashville or the Wheelock Cemetery, there is an unusual marker. It was placed there for Lizzie Kessler. She was a single woman. She stayed home and took care of her elderly father. And with her passing, her nieces and nephews purchased a Grecian maiden lady. It is probably the largest, tallest, I should say, tombstone in the entire township. But this lady stands above a large granite marker.
Yeah, I remember the grocery trucks coming, and the bread trucks. And at that time, you really didn't have to go to town. You did, but you wouldn't have had to because you had groceries brought right to your door. And of course, the kids always had to save their pennies to be able to buy a little candy when the grocery truck came.
My name is Susie Fox Spittler, and I just wanted to say that my great-grandmother, Maud Brown Fox, and her husband Thurman, lived at the Willow Tree for many years and tended that farm. And they always came over to Nashville to church. And I have her little black ribbon, didn't even think to bring it today, from her Widow's Mite Society. And she would bring her horse and buggy over, go to Little Widow's Mite Society meetings at night and go home alone. And the hired hand that they had that lived in the house was afraid of the dark, so when she got home, she had to put her horse away and take care of it all by herself. But she was a very faithful member of the Nashville church. They never missed a Sunday. They took part in many things. My dad went to Bible school there every summer. I imagine that she saw to that he got there for Bible school. And my mom and dad came from Tip City, never missed a pot pie supper at the Nashville church.
Wow.
You mentioned the Mite Fellowship. We still have the Mite Fellowship.
Do you? Mm-hmm. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes,
It's still
we
in
do.
existence.
It's still in
Good.
existence, and there's they do a lot of good work. And I happen to be president of the Mite Fellowship right now. And I don't know, do you want to say anything about the Mite Fellowship, Lois? Okay.
I'm Marilyn Razor, sister-in-law to Anita Bissett. And when we moved out to Nashville in 1962, it wasn't State Route 571, it was Route 71. And I understand the reason they changed it to 571 was because of the Interstate 71. They didn't want anybody to be confused. And I also heard that at one time there was a sugar mill at Nashville that nobody mentioned. It was up close to where the recycling center is now. Right on the curve across from Barney Brewers. But that's all I have to say at this time. Oh, there was one other thing. I understood that my father-in-law, Nevin Racer, was the one that donated the ground for the Coon Club.
I'd always heard that great-grandpa donated it for,
Well, maybe it was him before Nevin had it,
Yeah.
but that's what I was always told. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Yes, Fred.
I'm Fred Schaefer, and I live on the eastern suburbs of Turkey Foot. You Beck boys claimed you hopped the cars at Kessler and went to Ludlow.
yeah.
Well, the railroad ran right through our farm, and I was scared to death. I never did hop a car. I was afraid the cops would get me. So it ran right through the place, right behind the buildings, and I was scared to death to ever ride the railroad.
Well-
My father and mother, when they were married, they, on their honeymoon, they went to Wisconsin, and they rode the railroad from Kessler to Indianapolis to Chicago, and then up to his brother's place up north.
Fred, you remember what they called the boys there in Nashville?
No.
Called the Nashville Outlaws.
No comment.
I was going to comment on that Nashville Outlaws. I don't know whether it was the name of a ball team or whether it pertained to the people who lived in Nashville. But
I had a conversation with our older brother this morning about that down in Springfield, Missouri. He says there was no ball team, but the nickname was given to some of the fellows that lived out around Nashville at that time.
okay.
Outlaws. And so we became known as the Nashville Outlaw. All the boys were Nashville Outlaws.
Okay, I'd like to speak a little on the entertainment that we had going on around Nashville. Charlie probably remembers this. He just got a brand new J.C. Higgins bicycle. And I had an old Swin, and one winter it rained and it froze on the highway, and we had approximately 3/4 of an inch of rain. And Charlie got into his father's woodworking shop and cut up some 2x4s and notched them, and we tied those two bicycles together. And I think we used form wire to hold the blocks in place. And we started going up and down Nashville Road. Back in those days, they didn't salt. You know, they just waited to thaw. And we'd hit the brakes and we'd go round and round and round. And everything worked fine for about 3 days. Then on the third day, there started to be spots in the highway where the ice was no longer there. So we was doing some donuts and we hit a dry spot in the highway. And Charlie's brand new bike, his rear wheel folded in under the rest of it. I don't know whether he remembers that or not. Yeah. Okay. That was just some of the things we did. And we never got bored. We fished and walked the creeks and fish. And I never heard the word, Dad, I'm bored, or, you know, the way they do nowadays. There's always something to do. And speaking about the Boy Scouts, I was a charter member of that troop. Herman Scammyhorn was the scoutmaster, and I believe a fellow named Red Plummer may have been the assistant scoutmaster. But Herman Scammyhorn, and one thing I remember mostly about him is I believe he was working for Miller's Excavating, and he'd be doing some work maybe a half a mile away, and you could hear him whistling. Up and above the track hoe or whatever they called it back in the day, you could hear him sing, and I mean that guy. I mean I can't imagine somebody whistling that loud you could hear him a half a mile away. But I think in one of these other forums, somebody commented about that. But I do remember Herman Scammyhorn, and he did a lot for kids around Nashville and Frederick. And then Horace Fogel, I believe. As I recall, we was one of the first groups of guys that played softball up at the Coon Club.
We had some pretty good mentors back in those days, realistically, before that term became popular, I think, you know. Those guys was our mentors, if you will, that really helped us out. Terry's dad was one of them as well.
That was more likely after I left the scene.
Yes, it was.
That's all I have.
This is going back to another subject, which I should have gotten in some of my speech here before. But the gypsies, way back, the gypsies used to come through Nashville. And I was talking to this Joe Shellhouse. His granddaughter was my best friend in the first 3 grades of school. And her and I still talk a lot. And I got a lot of my information from her here, too. And she said the gypsies came down there. And, of course, they had food and stuff there. And they had to really watch because a lot of what they had would be missing when they left. And they didn't see them get it. But anyway, one of the gypsies took a billfold out of his pocket, and he didn't know it. And but the gypsies were every year they made their trip around, and I remember, I was so afraid of them. And so.
You remember the gypsies that used to come there and camp out for a few days before the sheriff's department would escort them out of the county? I remember it well.
I do remember that because I vaguely remember that, but I remember Mom saying the gypsies are in the area and I want everybody to stay in. Kids, all you kids stay in. So we were, when we heard the word, we were afraid. I do know that. One more thing on the bread truck. I tell you, we keep going back to that, but I'll tell you what. When that bread truck came, it was when I was a kid. That's the greatest thing in the world. Do you go in that thing? They were always so friendly, those drivers, and you could hop in there, and the smell in that bread truck was like nothing. I mean, you can smell it right now, can't you?
Yeah.
And my Uncle Charles would always say to the guy, "All right, you got any free?" I just remember, you got some free samples today? Every time, and by gosh, that guy would always throw us some donuts, some. Something, rolls, sweet rolls. He'd throw us some sweet. Charles always asked me, he'd always deliver. It was always a free sample.
They've talked about their it'd be your grandmother, Mary
Yeah.
Shellhouse. She lived down there on in Nashville, and I lived just a little bit north. When my son here, Terry, was a baby, I went out after the mail. And on the way back, I stepped on a rock, and it rolled, and I fell. And I lit on him. And he got the back of his head all bruised. I didn't know what to do, and I thought about Mary. And I wrapped him up and took him down there. And she took him, and she talked to him and got him stopped crying. And She checked him all over, and she said, Juanita, he's fine. She said, he's a little bruised, but she said, he's all right. And that always made my heart feel so good to think about her. She was so motherly.
I wonder what happened to me. No wonder I turned out like this.
Grandma Harshbarger, Mary Harshbarger there, I never knew a nicer lady, to tell you the truth.
That's right.
She practically
was-
raised me. I was over there all the time. She called me Billy.
I remember
Yeah,
that.
About the only one I ever let call me Billy. And she used to make cherry pies for me all the time.
You know, there was another business, and you were talking about people that had little businesses. Right there, TV repair, if I remember.
Oh, yeah, I heard that about that guy.
Right? You had that for
Yeah.
quite some time?
Yeah.
Until I got married, graduated, and I went to work for Chester Macy.
Yeah. Both Dick and I both worked for Chet off and on.
Just to give you a little idea, when I was 14 years old, I enrolled into a correspondence course, radio and TV repair. I think it cost me $149 for about a year's worth of schooling. And I opened up a shop behind the garage in used to be a coal shed, and I drywalled it. And I operated out of there. Before I ever had a driver's license, I had a Cushman motor scooter. And I'd put my tube caddy across the floor on that Cushman motor scooter, and away I'd go on a service call. I was 15 years old, more likely. I started working business when I was 14. And later on, if I need a car to bring one in or something, I would borrow Dad's car. And that's basically, I did that until I went to work for Chet Macy. And then I believe I quit him and I went over to Waco Aircraft and worked a couple of years. Then I got married. That was it. I left Nashville.
Actually,
But,
we kicked him out.
I don't know, I haven't heard anything mentioned, but I can give you a little lowdown on the people that lived in the area. If I'm wrong, maybe Juanita or Gail can correct me, but going south on Frederick Pike, right on the corner, there used to be a little two-room house or maybe a three-room house, and a fellow named Pete Elliott lived on the corner. And then on down, Van Dyke's house wasn't built yet, and the parsonage hadn't been built. And then we had Sam Burnside. Then on the left, down the road a little further, we had Dewey Hughes. And there wasn't nothing between Dewey Hughes and the Y or Sheer Road. And then on the left, we had a fellow named Herbert Collins, living in the Big Brick, right south of the Sheer Road. And then going on south towards Frederick, on the right-hand side, there was a fellow named Etherington. I forget their first name. But then we had Charlie Doe. I could go on to Frederick, but almost. But coming back, going north on Kessler Frederick Road, right on the corner, we had Mary Shellhass. John Clem built a house later on up there, but there was no home there, and Juanita's house wasn't there when I first moved to Nashville. And on the left, we had a small house, a guy named Scott lived there. Then next place up on the west side of the road, I believe, was Esther Macy, maybe. Trent lived there afterwards.
Arthur Trent.
And then we're going north. On the right-hand side, you had the Mendenhall Farm. I think Harry Sexar bought that later on, then Jerry Long bought it. And then the next place up on the right, we had Hollingsworth.
Yep.
And going north towards Kessler, we had Johnny Thompson, lived in a farmhouse. And that was about it till you got to Kessler.
And
Fred had-
Halls live up there.
Who?
Wasn't it Halls lived up there, that dog that bit Marlene that one time, put a gash in her leg? What farm was that?
There
Don't
was,
There was a farm there on the right-hand side before you got into Kessler.
there was,
Well, that's where Johnny Thompson
Was
lived.
that Johnny Thompson's border collie that bit
I
Marlene?
don't know about the dog.
Talk about a
There
dog
was,
that bit my sister.
there was, excuse me, the Hollingsworths was Fred Schaefer's aunt and uncle.
Mm-hmm.
They lived right in there.
Was that Earl?
Where Thompson lived. Before that was Kurganville and Jester.
Is that where he lived?
Yeah.
Okay, I heard that name. Coming back to Nashville, we'll go east, right at the corner of Nashville Road and 571 or 71 back in those days. We had, I believe Ned Davis lived on the corner for a while, and then Johnny Thompson had moved in there afterwards. And so going on the east, on the north side, we had Sally Curtis, then Martin Curtis, and that was the end of the houses clear up to the curve, they're Brewers. On the right-hand side, we had Byron Brewer, and next place up, I forget who lived there, might have been Leisure. Then we had Ida Miller's, Gray.
Keith.
That takes you out to Worley Road.
Keith Gray.
Going up Nashville Road, on the right, first place north off of 571, you had Harold Moat, Noah Baker. I believe there's two homes back in there. I think Ned Davis lived in one of them at one time or another. Then you had John Honeyman, Dick's home place, and on the left you had the Razors. Then on up the highway you had Albert Honeyman. Then on up on the right you had Sam Chowhouse. And then going on north, on the left-hand side you had Charlie Yunt. That takes you up to Colesville Road.
There's one other up there, it was Knifes lived up there
Yeah,
too.
well, I said Sam Chowhouse,
oh,
that's
okay.
Sam
Yeah.
Chowhouse place. George
Yeah.
Knife
George,
married his
George
daughter.
Knife.
Yeah.
Someone that we should mention is, now this is my memory going. Roy Van Dyke's parents lived in Nashville, and
Yeah, we could go back and
Do you wanna-
include these newer homes.
do you want to comment anything on your,
He lived there a long,
yeah, you
how
lived
many
there a long
years?
time?
45 years?
Yeah, something like that.
We'll go back and insert a
I think
few
it was built
homes.
Probably about 1949 or 50,
Uh-huh.
I think, is when the house was built.
They were,
I started first grade from
they were a nice family in Nashville. I
What
know.
year was that,
They
Roy?
lived beside
You
my-
started first grade?
Well, let's start on going south on Kessler Frederick Road, again in Nashville, 571, where this Pete Elliott lived. They tore that house down. A fellow named Myron and Donna Potts built a new home there. Then Roy Van Dyke's dad built the next one. And then they built the parsonage, maybe not in that order, but the parsonage built. And after I left, Razor Platte went in. That's about all I have.
I'd
Did
like
I
to
miss,
make one
did I
more-
miss any of the crossroads? See, I got Frederick, Norton,
Pretty well got it.
Nashville.
I'd like to make one more comment. The Homestead Golf Course, that farm was given as a land patent to Henry Smith, I believe in 1806. His daughter Elizabeth married Jonathan Knife. That farm is still in the Knife family, and it's probably one of the few farms in the township which remains in the same family's hands.
I got a comment about the Knife farm there. That lady that was there, Mrs. Knife, was my English teacher at West Mountain Union School.
Bessie.
I used to get detention at school, and I'd have to stay there for about 30 minutes. I'd be walking home, you know, towards Nashville, there in West Mountain. Guess who would pick me up? Mrs. Knife. I beat the bus home every time.
She was my English teacher as well.
She's a great lady.
Roy said she'd drive right by him. Was she? She were your home ec teacher? Wow. Will you help me thank the panel? They've done a wonderful job telling us about Nashville. And yes, thank them. We need to thank you. Thank you very much. It's been so wonderful today and so interesting. And thank you, audience. You've really added a lot to our day, our trip to Nashville. So thank you all very much, and we appreciate it. And we appreciate all of you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.